Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cherno. Welcome back to the Game Engine series. We finally wrapped up all of our C# scripting work. In fact, let me bring up the roadmap so that we can actually see where we're at, because it's pretty exciting. We've finished like the first kind of minimum viable product vertical slice situation of the scripting engine, and now we are moving on to, and we've merged it into master, so it's actually done. Let's label that as done. And now we're moving on to this project system, and we're supposed to do that on the 21st, and that is in fact the date today. So amazingly, we seem to be keeping up with these little dates that I set here. And then the idea is, after we finish this project system, which I don't know if we'll be able to get it all done today, store project specific and project file, creating project using I mean, we should be able to have a very basic version up and running. It doesn't really take that long, but once we finish that, next week there's not going to be a live stream because I will be away, and then the week after, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to start making a game. And then we're going to switch to development, right? So the idea of this game is to test out the engine so far. It's also because, like, I mean, of course we're missing certain things like audio and like packaging and whatever, and lots of other features as well. But we can more or less, like, now that we have scripting, we can flesh out that scripting system and actually make something before we go to Vulkan, which again is going to be necessary longer term. But at the current kind of point in time, it's really not going to introduce many new features. And because of that, I kind of feel like we should just make a game to be like, okay, we can make a game using our OpenGL renderer and everything's fine. Like, you don't need Vulkan to make a game, obviously. So let's just make it with our current tech, and then that way, when we actually switch to Vulkan, we can also compare, you know, the game inside OpenGL with the game inside Vulkan, and see if there's any differences, because there really shouldn't be, apart from potential performance gains. And then we'll move on to like all of this other stuff. And I don't know, like asset system, we might need that for a game. The reason why I'm saying might is because we might not. Like, it depends how we make it. Like, it might be annoying to not have like a proper asset system in place, but of course, you know, as long as you can render stuff and set textures and, you know, do what we're doing at the moment, you don't really need an asset system. You just need a way to actually load this stuff, right? So that's why we might not need that. But yeah, that's basically the plan. So today then, projects. So we need to be able to store project-specific data in a project file. So what is a project and how does this situation work? I could show you guys Big Hazel, but we won't do that because I'll just explain it. Basically, what I should do is get like some kind of blank page. Actually, if we just go to Visual Studio, I can just scroll down. All right, this is going to be my little whiteboard or blackboard or whatever. So basically, the idea with projects is it just exists as a way for us to kind of silo, I guess, or like separate and isolate. It's kind of what siloing, I guess, is. A certain game or project from other games or projects, right? So at the moment, the way that this works is we can open scenes, but what about other kind of resources that are attached to a specific project? So we know that scenes kind of, you know, with the current way that Hazel 2D works, you can kind of have a scene, which of course is just a file. It's just like a .hazel file or a .hscene file. I actually don't know what it is in Hazel 2D. I think it's just .hazel. But basically, you can have your .hazel file, and of course what I could do is make multiple folders on my computer, separate, you know, the different scenes that belong to different projects into different folders. I could kind of create my own project, isn't really, by just being organized with my files. But what about like other assets, right? So what about like, you know, the textures and I don't know, I was gonna say audio files. We don't have audio in Hazel 2D yet, but you know, what about all of the other kind of resources that we have and assets that we have that belong to that specific project, right? When we open up Hazelnut and we see that kind of content browser panel below, you know, what is that showing? Oh, that's just showing, well, at the moment, I think it's just showing like a hard-coded directory, but that directory specifically, the folder that contains all of the assets, that's kind of going to be like a special assets folder that is per project. You might want to have like a global setup or something like that, where basically you have potentially like, you know, almost like a database that's like shared between projects, because maybe you have common assets. You know, the editor itself is probably going to also have certain asset packs or like resources that it can use. So for example, something as simple as like a cube or a capsule or like, you know, a primitive like that, and also all of the shaders. You know, you want every kind of game to have that. You don't want to have to import like a cube model, you know, if you make a new project, for example. So you can have shared asset directories and all of that stuff, but at the end of the day, you still need a directory that is like specific and unique to the project that you're working on. And so that's really important. The other thing is obviously the whole scripting situation, right? So all of your kind of script stuff, like the actual like C# project and all of the associated code that you build and the binary that gets built from that also has to be kind of unique per project, because every game is going to have its own set of code, obviously, right? So this is kind of, it might seem really obvious. Like, I don't know if it's worth explaining all this stuff in detail. I always do, just because, you know, you might not think about like, well, what is a project? Why do we actually need one? I don't want people to start being like, well, of course I need a project because, you know, every other game engine has projects and it makes sense to make a new project. It's good to know why, because I think that's really important when you're making a game engine and when you're kind of going through this process of creating this like platform that you're going to use to make games or other interactive experiences, whatever it may be. The fact that you're making it yourself from scratch, like, you should take advantage of that, meaning that if there's a specific workflow you prefer, you have the power to kind of implement that. That's the whole point, and that's the whole benefit, really. It's the biggest benefit of making this stuff yourself rather than using an existing set of tools like an engine, you know, like Unity or Unreal. So that's why, like, I think explaining this stuff, I mean, I'm also live streaming this, so that's why, like, live stream chat, I'm looking at you guys as well. So if there's any questions you have, or if you think I'm kind of not explaining enough, or you want to know more, like, I'm always kind of looking at that feedback to make sure that's going well. But basically, it's interesting because, again, this is one of those things that, like, it's nice to explain, to be like, okay, this is actually why we have the concept of projects, and really it's just to be able to kind of silo out and separate you know, the assets and various other kind of data that a particular project is going to require, as opposed to a group of projects, really. And that's kind of why these things exist in the first place. So, yeah, and I mean, like, this is really all there is to it, right? Like, assets, you know, scenes are assets. So these things actually kind of get combined. You could also say scripts are assets, right? Inside Big Hazel, like, I don't think scripts are partially treated as assets. It's a little fuzzy. Scenes are definitely assets, though. Like, scripts are partially treated by, well, what I mean by that is, like, a script is, the engine is very, very well aware of what a script is. A script is not just, like, any other asset. And I guess neither is a scene, but a scene does have, like, an asset handle. So therefore I would, yeah, and I think this, yeah, I think I would more closely link scenes with assets than scripts, especially because, like, a script, like, what does a script mean? Does a script mean an entire binary, or does a script mean, you know, one kind of script file? In which case that also is potentially something that needs to be defined. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of projects. And so what we need then is, like, let's think about, like, what it means to make a new project. Well, really, I think making a new project, yeah, kind of just requires us to really specify some kind of directory on our computer. And then it's going to probably have other, like, potential variables that we can set up, such as the location of the assets and where they should live. But really, I would say that the most important thing, like, making a new project should just kind of be like, okay, can you please give me, like, a name for your project and, like, a directory, right? So tell me where you want it on your computer and tell me what the name should be, and that's kind of it. Because I can automatically say create an empty scene. I can automatically set up an assets directory for you and even import some kind of starting asset pack, almost like a package in Unity, where you just kind of, you can start with existing assets or whatever, and I can set up a blank kind of, you know, scripting project for you that will build, you know, a binary into the right place and all that stuff. Like, that's pretty easy to do. So I really don't need much for you. Of course, if you want to come in there, customize everything, yeah, then you might want to, you know, you might have to set, you might want to like set a custom asset directory, you know, maybe you have more than one scripting binary, maybe you have like a library or like two different, I don't know, for some reason you've separated your game into two different binaries. I don't know. Could be anything. There's a lot of kind of leeway here. But in the base case, that's really all you kind of need, right? And so where does this stuff live? So how do we actually know what the assets directory is? How do we know where the scripts are? How do we know all of this? And any other project-specific settings? Well, usually you have a project file, right? So I think in Big Hazel, we call this a .hproj file, .hazel project file, right? And what this is basically just a YAML file that contains kind of information about your project, right? So that would be things like the name of the project, right? That would be, you know, an asset directory. That would be like maybe a script directory, or like a script, kind of like a script binary path, or like which binary do you want me to load, that kind of thing. So I'll say script bin. And then the other kind of really important thing is like a start scene. So the idea is we obviously have like, you know, in the assets directory, we might have a whole bunch of different scenes. But when we start up our game, what should be the first scene that we start? Right, so usually that would be like maybe like some kind of main menu scene, or maybe some kind of like opening titles, or like, you know, all that stuff, like an intro scene or something. That's gonna kind of dictate what scene to load first, and then usually the way it will work is scenes will kind of, well, there's different ways you can set it up, but scenes can flow into each other. So a scene can have like a trigger at the end of it, for example, maybe it's a cinematic, and then at the end of it, you can have a trigger or an event to actually load a different scene. If it's something like a main menu scene, obviously you'll kind of you'll add some functionality and some scripting probably to a button that says, okay, when I hit the play button, you know, let me just attach like some kind of C# function to that says, you know, load scene, you know, game or something, right? So in that case, that obviously is something you press enter or whatever, you click the button, and then it transitions into the game scene, right? So that's kind of how the whole application flows, the whole game flows. But from the beginning, you need a start scene. And usually like that could be, you know, in the simple case, that could be like a path. In a more kind of packaged case, it's probably going to be like a UUID of the particular scene that you want to load. And then that's kind of how that begins. So this is basically what we need to create today. It's really just kind of coming in here and actually making this YAML file, having all of this data, loading it in, and then having some kind of, obviously in-memory kind of representation of it, which is probably going to be like a class called project, which will contain access, kind of give us access to these variables, and let us access them, because a lot of times it's going to be important for us to, for example, load an asset. Well, how do we load an asset? Well, we need to obviously load it relative to like the asset directory. So we need to ask the project for its asset directory, and then we can kind of combine that with, say, a file path to load it. Obviously, I'm talking about like the editor here, not the runtime, because the runtime wouldn't have file paths, but the editor obviously will. So, you know, you can kind of take your asset directory, your AD, and then combine it. I've literally drawn a slash here like you would do with the C++17 file system API. You take your asset directory and then you combine it with your like asset path. And then that is like basically your absolute path. I mean, it could be relative to the working directory. Usually asset directory is relative to the project directory, by the way. So these things would be relative to the project directory. So you'd really, if you wanted the absolute path, it might be like, I can't redo, can I? It might be like project directory / asset directory / you know, asset path. Why would runtime not have file paths? So typically, the way that runtime assets work is we don't just have assets sitting around like we do in the editor. So if you're making a game and you're in Unity or Unreal, then you would just have like, you know, a folder filled with like various asset files. So you might have like FBX or GLTF files. You might have your little PNGs as textures and all that stuff. So they're kind of your raw master assets, we call them usually. So that's good for development, but when we ship a game, these formats are not really what we want for a couple of reasons. First of all, they obviously give everyone a nice intermediate format to access your assets and rip them and sell them or like modify them or do whatever that you want with them. And usually games like to protect their assets, so that's not that good, but also they're just not in a good format for a game's runtime. In other words, they're slower to use, they might contain extra information. Yeah, loading will be slower, as I said. You know, they're just not that great. So what we generally do is we convert them into an engine-friendly format. So usually all game engines really will have their own kind of 3D model format, their own texture format, whatever. And then, you know, specifically for a runtime, usually these things get packaged together into like a binary blob format, kind of. And binary blob just means a bunch of like binary kind of, you know, data or whatever, blobbed kind of together or like combined together into one big file. So in Big Hazel, we create something called an asset pack. And what that is basically all of the engine-friendly formats that have been created from things like FBX, GLTF, PNG, you know, whatever. That the engine is engine-friendly in the sense that they're really fast to load because they're optimized for how we, like the end result of how we want them inside Hazel's runtime. And then they're all kind of within this one big file. And on top of that, you know, you might add some compression to that so that you know, just physically make the file size on disk smaller and all that stuff. So it's really, there's a lot of transformation that happens to get to that final kind of file that you ship. And obviously, since they're all within an asset pack, and by the way, like it doesn't have to be inside one asset pack file. You could have like several volumes of this stuff. You know, it's not necessarily one file, but it could be one file, right? For example, when we ship dichotomy for Ludum Dare, last Ludum Dare 51, you know, that was just one kind of 100 megabyte asset pack file. Obviously there are no file paths, like that doesn't make sense because the asset pack is one file. So you don't really, you could of course still maintain some kind of virtual file system inside there, but that's just not useful. And also you could say that if you're really, not that this matters, and I don't really like making games like this, but if you are serious about security, file paths can also give away what the asset is, right? So again, we're not really too focused on security in Hazel, especially like client-side security like that. So in other words, if someone really wants to get a 3D model file, I mean, they can do that even if you have top-notch security, because at the end of the day, that 3D model file gets to your GPU and has to be rendered, right? You can't hide that. You know, you're literally rendering triangles. And so it'd be fairly trivial to rip that anyway. But again, like there's no point in kind of dealing with strings, dealing with file paths, when you can just have asset IDs. And the other reason why we specifically like asset IDs is because asset IDs during development can point to any file, right? If you have that kind of indirection, instead of just having like an entity, so here's like my entity, and then I want like, you know, it has like a mesh component. Instead of that pointing directly to an FBX file, right, which might have a series of settings for importing and stuff, if I suddenly want to rename that or point to something else, I have to basically sever this connection and make an entirely new file. But if I have a middleman, like an asset handle, and then that actually points to an FBX file, then you can see how I can easily rewire this without actually affecting this in the first place. And so that's really powerful. Would engine internal shader files be packaged in the same way? Oh, and one more thing as well is that UUIDs, obviously, I mean, in Hazel, there's, in both Hazel 2D and Big Hazel, they're 64-bit integers, which is just a bit easier to deal with from like a CPU's point of view compared to obviously a string. Would engine internal shader files be packaged in the same way? Yeah, they are. So in Big Hazel, it's very, very similar. They actually, I think in Big Hazel, they actually are using strings. but they do get compiled in, they do get combined into something called a shader pack, which I think is like an HSP. Hazel shader pack, is it? Something like that. This is in Big Hazel. And what this is yeah, basically all of your shader, all of your kind of, you know, release build of your shader source code. So this is like this perv binary data, along with extra reflection information, such as like what resources, so in other words, what textures do you have in what binding slots, all that kind of information as well. And that's stored inside one file as well. And we ship that as part of the distribution. So yeah, anyway, that's kind of assets. Again, we will talk like, I actually put out a video on YouTube recently. If you guys go to my channel, it's like the 2 new features in Hazel video. It's fairly recent, like a month ago maybe. That actually talks about this asset pack system. So in Big Hazel, because we shipped our first game with it when we made the game in 72 hours, which was Dichotomy. So yeah. What was I saying? Yeah, but anyway, we will, like, in general though, we'll kind of, what's going on? In general, we will be talking about this and implementing something like this when we get to the asset system, which is not that far down the road. So yeah. Okay, anyway, we should really focus on this though. So what I'm going to do is, I guess I'll just like, so we have source, Hazel, let's make a new folder. I just don't know. I just don't really want to put it in an existing folder. Make sure show all files is on. And we'll make a new folder called project. Now, the thing is, like, how much, like, project, the kind of domain, I guess, of project. Like, projects usually are kind of more of like an editor thing, but they are still necessary in the runtime. Now, again, like, we can debate this for hours, and there's probably there's probably good reasons for both sides, but you know, at the end of the day, we are kind of trying to create an engine in a short amount of time, relatively. So in other words, like, I'm not going to be too pedantic about this stuff that, again, if there's like a team of 100 engineers working on this and 3 of them decide to have a meeting that lasts for 2 hours to decide this, that's cool. But we kind of keep things simple is what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to create this in the kind of core Hazel module, right? So in other words, what I'm saying is that, like, even though projects are kind of necessary in the runtime, if you think about it, like, obviously all the functionality for certain kind of aspects of projects, such as even like the concept of an asset directory, doesn't really make sense in the runtime. So you could argue that, why is it here? You know, you should put it into Hazelnut, because it's not really relevant in the runtime. And this is another thing that people forget all the time. When you are making a game engine, and again, you know, you do you. I'm not telling you guys how to live your lives, and to be honest, like, the fact at the end of the day, even though this might be a little bit of a sad fact, the fact at the end of the day is that most of you people building your own engines, like, to put it bluntly, won't amount to anything. Meaning that, like, those engines are just going to be, probably for you, learning experiences. They're going to be projects. Like, the engine itself is going to be your project, right? This is different from if you're actually making an engine for its kind of intended use case, which is usually to create and ship and distribute games. And those are 2 different things, right? Because if you're, like, another good word is production, right? So if you're making an engine for production, that's different than making an engine because you just enjoy engine programming, or you want to, you know, learn about graphics, algorithms, or you want to, you know, build together like art or something, and you just want to render it nicely and take screenshots. Because in all those cases, you know, what you're doing is you really are focusing on the editor. Like, the editor is the application you're building. You know what I mean? But on the other hand, if you're making a game engine and you're going to ship games with it, like the overwhelming priority should be the runtime, because who's going to use the editor? Like you and your team, basically, right? And who's going to experience the runtime? Every single player of your game that you ship to, right? So clearly this is much more important than this. So what I see all the, and again, like that's why I had that little disclaimer in the beginning, because I know that the reality is that most of you, this won't exist. Like most of you will not ship games with this engine, you know? So in other words, you should prioritize this. Like that makes sense. But for the people who actually do, and like, you know, I've said this before, but even though like obviously I love game engines, I wouldn't be, you know, devoting my life, you could say, almost, or devoting my career to game engines if I didn't like them. But even though I love game engines, at the end of the day, I still want to ship, like we still want to ship games, you know, in Hazel. Like that is kind of, at the end of the day, we want to make this engine and we want to ship a game and we want everyone to be able to play that game. And so like, even though lots of people are interested in the engine itself, and of course we as a development team, we want to make the tools as good as they can be so that we can make a better game. That's important as well. But at the end of the day, like, you know, Hazel itself does focus on the runtime. And like saying that, I'm talking about Big Hazel. Like, this game engine series is clearly educational. Like, you know, even though one of our kind of goals, I guess, is to actually ship a game on Steam using this engine, using Hazel 2D, you know, it's more obviously about the education aspect. Whereas Hazel 3D, or like, well, I don't know why I call it Hazel 3D. It's just called Hazel, but people forget. People don't know what I'm talking about, so I say Big Hazel. But Big Hazel, that is like the serious engine that we actually want to, you know, make a big serious game in and ship that. So because of that, the runtime's really important. So the reason why I started on this entire kind of tangent, a lot of talking this episode, but basically the reason why I started on this is just to say that, like, you know, when you are thinking about like, oh, where does this go? Or what code do I want to add here? Just remember what your goal is. Like, is it to ship a game? In which case, please think about this more than anything else. Or is it just to like make a set of tools for yourself, you know, to just mess around with and have fun in which case it doesn't matter because you're not shipping anything. So yeah, food for thought. But anyway, we're gonna just pop this in here. And yeah, for the record, like obviously in Big Hazel, you know, this stuff is inside the Hazel module, right? So, you know, and the only reason you probably wouldn't want it there is maybe you don't want all that complexity at runtime, but you also have to remember that even though we do like optimization a lot, and optimization and performance is very, very important, you can't ignore the fact that computers are very fast these days. And that means that a few extra cycles of loading stuff that doesn't really need to be loaded, like, might not be that big of a deal. I like to develop a game engine, but I don't know where to start. Is there any roadmap? Should I learn about rendering first? You can just follow my game engine series. Like, that would be the short answer for that. Like, you don't have to start with rendering first, but you probably should, because getting stuff on the screen and being able to see stuff is like kind of step one, I think. It's probably the only real sane way to begin. Even though, like, yeah, like, I don't know. I think an experienced game engine developer might start with, like, you know, the core library and the core architecture of the engine, you know, making sure that, like, all the application support stuff and platform support stuff is ready to go before they even spin up a window. But that's just like, you know, if it's your first engine, you're going to want to start with graphics. So yeah, you should learn about rendering first. I'd love to make a nice rendering course. If only I could take like 6 months off doing all of YouTube and stuff, then that would be great. Okay, anyway. Oh, and someone I think asked earlier, will I upload this stream on YouTube? Yes. I've been a little bit behind with YouTube uploads, just because I've been so busy with everything else, but I will have all the recordings, so I will be publishing them to the Cherno Unplugged channel when I get around to them. The backlog's pretty big though. Okay, so yeah, I mean projects, like let's think about like the stuff that is inside like a project. So project settings basically. So what do we have? Well, we have the name of the project, right? Which we could, I don't know, we could call it like, you know, untitled project or something. Maybe just untitled to begin with. What else did I say? So we need some file paths. So like asset, directory, script, path. Yeah, ray tracing. I guess ray tracing is like that, but I'm more talking about like actual, you know, Vulkan kind of real-time rendering as like an actual kind of professionally made paid course. Like that, I would love to do that. And I am kind of working on it, but like I spend like 1 day every 3 months working on it. So yeah, unfortunately. Okay, so let's see. So we're gonna have obviously our project settings. I don't know if we should call them settings. Like they're not really settings. What do we call them in Big Hazel? Let's pop open Big Hazel. I don't know why I'm hiding this from you guys. So let's go to project. Let's see what's inside a project in Big Hazel. Okay, so yeah, config. I guess that's smarter. So this is all the stuff that is inside there. Yeah, so start stage, don't forget that. So yeah, script module path. And then asset directory. Asset registry. We don't need that at the moment. And some other like stuff that is relative, that is really only relevant to the editor. Okay, cool. What's chat saying? One mentality I see people have is starting right way. Not to be rude, but you can always refactor, recode, and remake most code in project. Once you code something, it's not fossilized in your computer. Yeah, that's definitely true, and that's why like I like even, you know, I get caught in that mentality that like you have to do it right the first time a lot when I'm making videos, because I feel like, you know, if I'm making like a series of videos, like obviously I want to be like, I want to do this the good way because I don't want this to be like 100 episodes. Game Engine series is different because this is a long series, but if it's something short, like I don't want to have to redo too much stuff. But aside from that, yeah, like at the end of the day, like, you know, you're programming, you're writing software, like you're not building, you know, this isn't the construction industry where like, yeah, you should get stuff right like immediately. Otherwise that's going to be possibly impossible to fix without tearing down the whole structure. With programming and software, it's very easy. Everything's very malleable. And even though, yes, it might take a bit of effort to fix certain things or rewrite certain systems, it's always possible. And that's kind of one of the great things about that. Okay, so let's call this project config. Thank you, Sanso84, for the sub. Appreciate the support. If you know DirectX 12 and can make a course on that, it'd be great too. I do have some DirectX 12 experience, but Vulkan, it just seems like I have a lot more Vulkan experience because if I had to pick one API, it would be Vulkan, just because of course it targets more platforms. But DirectX 12 and Vulkan are very similar. There are some differences, of course, but they are very similar. So I feel like, you know, even if you want to learn DirectX 12, if you learn Vulkan really well, then you'll kind of be set, I guess, with DirectX 12 as well. All right, cool. Vulkan tutorial and Sasha Williams example is enough. Nah, I disagree with that. I think there's like, the problem with Vulkan tutorial and Sasha Williams is that like, they're supposed to be very, well, Vulkan tutorial is supposed to be very basic in the sense that like This is just teaching you about how Vulkan works. And Sasha Williams' examples are very like, they're more about how do I do this thing that I know I need to do inside Vulkan. They're not really about graphics and rendering and stuff, if that makes sense. They're like, you know, when I'm talking about a rendering course, and this is getting so off topic, but when I'm talking about a rendering course, I'm talking about like how to actually build like a 3D renderer, you know? And that's not something that those things cover. They cover mostly like, you know, what, you know, barriers, memory barriers or whatever are, and like layout transitions are in Vulkan and how to do that, you know? And so is like for example, like I've said this in my Bloom video that I made like a year ago, but you know, Sasha Williams' Bloom example, like that shows you how to set up the pipeline and the textures and the shaders and whatever to theoretically achieve that effect in Vulkan. But it's not about the actual code of that effect, right? Same with like his shadows. Like the shadows are not good shadows, but it's not supposed to show you how to render beautiful shadows. It's supposed to teach you what you need to know to render shadows in Vulkan. So do you guys see like the distinction? It's more about like, how do I achieve this effect in general in Vulkan using Vulkan's API, not like the actual graphics programming side of it. It's more about the API programming than the graphics programming. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. But I like, so my course would kind of be more focused on the actual graphics programming, but yes, we would use Vulkan, and I probably would explain a fair bit of that as well. Anyway, whatever. This is becoming like some kind of promotional content for a course that doesn't exist. I'm gonna stop talking about that. Just a little dream of mine. I should hire someone to just be me, basically, and run like the rest of this channel and everything, and live stream with you guys for the next 6 months, so I can go away into like some cabin in the woods and just create this super amazing graphics course. But whatever. Okay, so there's the config. Yeah, the only other thing I guess we need is probably the start scene. Milburn, thank you for the sub. You forgot you were subbed. So the start scene is just going to be like probably a file path at this point to, well, I don't know, like if it's a file path, it should be a path. Like this will probably end up being like a UID. I guess for now we can just make it a path. CRDNU and Gooch 14, thank you guys for the subs. Appreciate the support. Man, specifically for learning Vulkan, but otherwise I agree with you. Yeah, I probably wouldn't make like a Vulkan course, like, or at least I wouldn't call it that, right? Because like, yeah, I mean, I definitely have no interest in making like a course that just teaches you how to use the Vulkan API, and then the result of that course is like a triangle or a 3D model, and that's it. Like that's like, there's no point in that, and that's like, in a way that's beneath me, not in terms of like I'm too good for that, but in terms of like, why would I, you know, there's much better things to spend my time on than making like essentially a reference to the Vulkan API. Okay, anyway, getting a bit chatty here. So yeah, that's everything that the project kind of has. Now, there is also like, you know, you can really only have one project active at a time, which kind of means that we don't really need to, like, we can always load, I mean, we can always like switch projects and do all that stuff, but usually we just have one kind of active project. And so because of that, I think, I mean, we're still using shared pointers out, aren't we? If we think about this, the other thing that I didn't mention, by the way, in my little diagram is that how this should work as well is basically when we have like a project loaded, right? Since the project itself kind of has all of these things tied to it, such as like an assets directory and everything, it doesn't just mean that if we want an asset, we can reach for the currently active project, get the asset directory, and then load our asset that we want to load. It also means that if the project dies, so if we unload the project, right, or we switch to a different project, then all of the loaded assets that we have, they need to be released. So in other words, projects have to be, they have to kind of have a lifetime as well. Or I guess what I'm trying to say is we want to be able to tie objects to the lifetime of the project. So the project should own, in a way, it should like have ownership over certain things that are part of our engine, such as all of the loaded assets. Because like what I'm trying to say is there's no way you can switch projects and then maintain your assets loaded. Like that doesn't make any sense. If you switch project, you unload everything. Like you might not unload editor specific things like the play button image in the editor. That doesn't belong to the project anyway, that belongs to the editor. But anything related to that game, that all has to get unloaded. And there's a lot of other kind of auxiliary, like for example, the script engine as well, and all the associated scripts to that all should get unloaded. So in other words, the project, it's good for the project to define like a lifetime or like a scope essentially for certain assets inside your engine as well. And that's pretty good to have. Fan of Cherno, thank you. 20 months. Really appreciate the support. Fan of Cherno. I wonder who Fan of Cherno is. What if it's secretly someone I know? That would be interesting. I was at my local supermarket like last week and someone recognized me and I was like, this is too close to home. This is too close to home. I was like looking over my shoulder as I was walking back to the car being like, but better not follow me home. No, I'm kidding. It was a nice guy. Okay, so let's make an inline static. So what do we, this is like ref, right? So ref is a shared pointer. Yep. So ref project, active project, and then I just want to have like static. I mean, we can have like a project config. I don't know if I want to make this const or not. And then we can do return s active project mconfig. Now, if you really wanted to as well, and you probably should do this, like you probably should just assert to make sure include, let's see. Where is all the ref stuff stored? Inside base, okay. You want to probably assert to make sure, and this can just be an assert. I don't know, maybe this should be a verify. Do we have verifies? No, we don't. Okay, set that up. It's not hard. It's just an assert that's also active in release mode. So get config, but yeah, other than that, we can also create like some little shortcuts for stuff that we definitely need. So for example, we want to, we want to be able to get the asset directory. So maybe give us that. But again, I would do it like this. So that we assert to make sure that's actually there. I don't think we need this. And also like maybe a static, load basically. So load will kind of make the project. It'll load it from disk, and then it will also. So let's do project.cpp. It'll load it from disk and it'll set it to be the active project as well. So let's go ahead and implement that in the CPP file. The reason why I'm doing these guys in the headers is there's not a really definitive reason for this. It's just because they're basically getters, and so even though they do have a little bit more code, I just like to have that stuff. Like this stuff is never going to change. But there's no real benefit. The compiler might choose to inline it a bit more aggressively if it's in the header like this. I don't know if that's a myth or if that's true, but other than that, yeah, there's probably not much of a difference. Okay, so let's do const file system path to load our project, and then I guess what we'll try and do is we'll basically try and deserialize it, and upon succeeding, we'll do create ref project. And then, I don't know, like we could just get the config, right? So auto config or something like that. And then we could like deserialize it. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make a separate file for that. I like to have my serialization stuff in a separate file, kind of like we do with the scene serializer, how we have scene and then we have scene serializer, because there's like serialization tends to be pretty verbose, and it's nice to be able to like separate that out. So that's why I do that. And yeah, and like how you do this as well is up to you. I mean, in the scene serializer, do we set that as like a, yeah, so that's kind of how I like to do it. We basically pass in a project that's like the kind of context around what we're dealing with, and then we have basically a serialize and a, I guess they can both be bools, and a deserialize, right? And then that goes to a specific file path, or you could even provide like a stream or something. And let's use the file system API for this as well. Cool, and then yeah, and then this is like your little context basically. That's where you're serializing to or deserializing. Serializing from or deserializing to. Do we make a namespace Hazel? All right. Yeah, thanks guys for the hype train. Okay, so this just sets the context. Pretty simple. Man, I feel like I haven't done any programming in so long. Like this is, like there's so many videos at the moment in the pipeline that like I've mostly been editing and making like videos. I haven't done much programming, so I'm excited to, hopefully after my break, I'll be back into Hazel a lot, because I have missed working on Hazel and doing all that. Do you still have a Rancho Sylvia Cherno? Wow, that's a blast from the past. No, I don't. That's, by the way, for those of you who completely are out of the loop, that's a coffee machine I had like 3 years ago. So yeah, no, I have a Breville like dual boiler kind of one now. I think it's called like Dynamic Duo or something. Might be different in other countries. Yeah, this is C++. Okay, so serialize, deserialize. So like if we look at the scene serializer, that's another thing obviously that uses YAML. We probably should put a lot of this stuff into common files, but we won't need this stuff anyway. Uncle Bick, thanks for the support. Thanks for the sub. No, I don't think it's a Barista Pro. Talking about coffee machines now. Is it a Barista Pro? Barista Pro is like the, no, it's not a Barista Pro. It's this thing. I'll show you guys in a minute. It's this thing. And it came with this thing as well. $2,200 in Australia. What the heck? Man, these things age like retro consoles. Like I got mine for like $1,200 new from a retail store. What on earth? Is that real? This is the coffee machine I have, but it's black actually. I have this one. And that grinder. How is this so expensive? What? Is this like a new model or something? It doesn't look like it. It looks exactly the same as mine. That's unreal. It's like twice the price. Maybe because it's all like sold out. I don't know. That's weird. Damn. No, that's insane. And if it was USD, that'd be even worse. That'd be like $3,000. And that's the thing. It's not really a high-end one. Wait, maybe that's just like because it's on the Brazil website. Like, let's check like a retail store. Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is different. This is better. Yeah, see, this is basically it. This is without the grinder, I guess, but see, it's like $1,000. But still, that has actually gotten more expensive. Because I got mine like 3 years ago. That's legit, like, aged like fine wine. Wild. That everything's just so ridiculously expensive these days. I don't know about you guys, like living in other countries, but in Australia and in Melbourne, like stuff has become so expensive. Like cheese has gotten like 50% more expensive or something. It's insane. Yeah, okay, people are saying it's everywhere. Anyway, what's the world coming to? So, like, honestly, say I shouldn't be saying this, but save your Twitch subs. you need them. Unfortunately, I do as well, but it's okay. I don't like Twitch subs that much because Twitch takes like 50%. Save your Twitch subs, convert them into patreon.com/thecherno. By the way, did I tell you guys? If you go to patreon.com/thecherno and you sign up, you no longer have to wait for me to manually give you access to Hazel, because we now built a system that you can automatically link your Patreon account to your GitHub account, and it will give you access automatically, which is really good. And the reason we did that was because we had to switch from GitLab to GitHub. And I was like, I'm sick of talking to my fans. Let me just build a system so I don't have to reply to messages. But really, it's just so that I don't have to, so that people don't have to wait like a week for me to reply. So yeah. Okay, so this is the way serialization works. I don't know. Should I cut that out of the episode? Like we've been getting distracted. With all this stuff. Like, what do you guys think? Should that coffee machine be part of the Game Engine series episode? Like, should it be real like that? Or should we just cut that out of the actual, like, I'm talking about when it goes up on YouTube. Make it real. Okay. I'll keep it there. Of course, it adds personality. All right, cool. I figure if you're watching like episode 140 or whatever of the Game Engine series, you probably, you know, are more here for like the fun and stuff than like being dedicated to learning how to build a game engine. All right, so anyway, yeah, I was saying we should probably move this stuff to like a more central header file, because obviously this stuff like applies to just any vec2, vec3, or vec4 that we actually want to serialize or deserialize to YAML. But we don't need any of this for the projects anyway, so I'm probably not going to bother with that. So if we just take a look at how to actually serialize stuff. So let's do the serialize first. We'll have to anyway. So this is how we serialize something. So if I just copy that and go back to project serializer, let's go back to this and we'll grab YAML. We might have to grab fstream as well. This stuff we don't need. Okay, so basically the idea is we'll probably like have the word project here, and then we'll have the name of the project. So m project. So we should get the config because we're gonna need that. Const auto config. And let's just do config name. And then like, I mean, this is a map anyway, so it's gonna have all the stuff here. I think I mean, like, I guess what I should do is actually, let's do this instead. Let's do out. Well, I mean, we don't need to do it this way, but let's do it this way anyway. So what we can do is we can actually put like this project, like basically we can have, I guess this would be like a map, right? the key is project, but instead of having this as the name, as the thing, as the value, the name as the value, we actually have another map, right? And this map is the value, and that is going to have stuff like, for example, the name of the project, right? So that will be config.name, and you'll see what this looks like. Probably good to do it this way, but we can have everything else we need inside project. So start scene, asset directory, script path. We don't have that much stuff. So start scene, asset directory, and script. Well, we'll say script module path. That's what we called it in Big Hazel. And then that will of course be, so start scene. We might have to implement this stuff. Well, you can just do .string actually. So we probably don't need to make special YAML CPP kind of things for that. Return value ignored. What do you mean return value ignored? That's a bit weird. Don't know what that means. Cut it and just leave to save your money for Twitch sub. Pledge to Patreon, so that's funny. Yes, the end map as well. Yeah, usually when I do this, so this is like the, so begin map is fine. And then we can just do, this is like the root. You can add little comments here just to make this stuff easier. So you can see what map you're referring to, and if you're really cool, I don't know if this is necessarily cool, but what you can do, which I usually don't, is you can actually wrap the begin map and end map like this. You can put that inside there if you want, and likewise for this. So what this kind of, the benefit of this is just you can see exactly what's in which map, and you can spot easy errors like that as well. So, because the idea is this should always end with root. Oh, sorry, this should always end with an end map right before the brace, because that's what that is. And I don't know. I mean, you could move this into here if you wanted to. I don't know. Whatever. It's kind of like you're opening that and ending that. Yeah, the end sequence was just left over from what we copied. Okay, so anyway, that's pretty much it. That's all this stuff. I might leave the scopes. Why not? And then we'll output to file path, and that's it basically. Okay, so that's done. Deserialize, obviously gonna be the same thing. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get the config, except this time it's not gonna be const, because we're gonna write to it. And then we're going to, let's go back to scene serializer so we can snash some code. So deserialize, so we basically do this, and we do that. Okay, cool. So back here, we'll grab that. File path will be that YAML load file. Apparently it doesn't like, really? So if it doesn't like that, whatever. We'll get the string, we'll give it to this thing. We load the file, obviously if it fails, you know, fail to load hproj file or whatever. I'll just say project file. I'm pretty sure I didn't add that in the first place. I was like a pull request. But anyway, so, and then if there's no project node, then we also return false, right? Because it's not a project file or something like that. Probably would not be bad to print an error as well. And we should return true, by the way. Forgot to do that. And then we'll continue with the deserializing. So we definitely know that we have a project node. And so inside the project node, we're going to have all of these things, right? So that's our kind of key, and this is our value. Well, actually, the project node is going to be a map. So the value of the project node is going to be a map, right? So we'll, well, actually, no, I think we should just be able to access that normally, right? So if I just do project node, and then I try and access like all of this stuff, that should probably work. .as std string. So this goes into config name, and then start scene, asset directory, script module path. You can get them all as strings, right? Because they are all strings. And then this should just automatically, like there's a constructor for file system path that takes in a string, so this should be all good. And that's it, we return true. All right, cool. Yeah, I don't know, maybe worth surrounding the whole thing with a try catch, but whatever. We'll see how this works. We might experiment with it a bit later. Cool. All right, so now obviously load and save, right? So load and save. So save, I mean, what's save gonna do? Save, probably save active or something. And then also new. So new, load, and save active. Or something, I don't know. Let's implement those guys. New is pretty simple. And it also sets it as active. Load, yeah, we'll basically do that. And then it will do project serializer, s active project, serializer dot deserialize path. Well, I don't know if it's worth doing anything here. VTold, thank you for the Prime sub. Appreciate the support. I don't know if it's worth doing anything here, really. Because, yeah. I mean, it could just return, like, null or something. Well, no, we can return that. Otherwise, null, I guess. The thing is, it actually automatically overwrites it. I guess what we could do is not do this just yet. So we could just say sActive project equals project. Project is this, right? Otherwise, we return null or something, and we don't update the active project, so only if it succeeds. Save is a bit easier, I guess, because we just do... and I guess we can return whether or not that was successful. So serialize instead. And we can just return that. As I said, that's pretty easy. All right, cool. Yeah, that's pretty good. So that's it. That's all of our project stuff, basically. Now, obviously a new project at the moment is a bit weird because we don't actually specify a new directory. This is just a new project in terms of like, squad is still active. That's funny. Yeah, I need to update my Nightbot. Anyway, so yeah, obviously like the new project workflow in general, like if you do actually click new project or whatever, then it has to like probably present you with like a little form to fill in your name and like choose a directory basically and all of the other stuff. There might be certain options as well, but we're not going to bother with any of that stuff today. We're just going to make sure that programmatically it all works, because that's really all that needs to exist, and then we can, you know, make an actual new project workflow that copies across like certain existing configurations and sets up like C# and does all that stuff later. Cool. So yeah, basically that's kind of it. So that's it from like the actual project API side of things. Of course, now we need to kind of integrate the system into the engine itself, which shouldn't be too difficult. Like, honestly, we basically just need to make sure that when we like launch Hazelnut, we need to load a project. So at the moment, I believe we actually load a scene. So if we check out our command line arguments, you know, you can see we load assets, scenes, physics2d.hazel, right? So that's it's gonna be a little bit different. Let's do this first, actually. So into hazel.h, I'm just gonna include, I guess, project. Let's just do it here. Hazel project. And then what I'm gonna do over here is just basically when we create the application, just to make this, I'm gonna do project new, right? And save active. And I'm gonna save it into sandbox.hproj. So this line of code is really all I want to run, because what that's going to hopefully do is actually create a project file for us with just like the default settings, which probably won't be too much stuff. All right, so I can just put a breakpoint here, make sure that code runs, it's done. So now if I go to our working directory, which is here, then you can see we have a sandbox.hproj file. And if I drag that in, check this out. We have all of our kind of default kind of things. So let's see how this is going to work. So we need to fill in some of these things. So basically sandbox.hproj, right? Let me just close that for a second. It's going to be inside the project directory. So you can see we have our sandbox project, and inside we have assets, scripts, all of that stuff, as well as sandbox. So this is where it's going to be relative to. So the assets directory is going to be assets, right? The script module path is going to be basically that. So scripts, it's going to be relative to assets as well. Scripts, binaries. And then, nice. And then sandbox.dll. The start scene is like, well, our current start scene is actually in assets, scenes, physics 2D, because if you take a look at the way it's set up, like we created this project just for the C# thing, but this is actually the assets directory that has everything. So all the shader cache stuff we don't care about. All the fonts we don't really care about. I think they're in use by Hazelnut. But the scenes and the textures, these things I'm actually going to cut, right? Which is going to cause some problems, but that's the point. And I'm going to put into sandbox project assets, right? So we're going to have a scenes directory, and I'm going to have a textures directory, and that's going to be all here. So that means that our start scene is going to be, it's relative to the assets directory, so it's going to be scenes/physics2d. Scenes/physics2d dot, I think Hazel. Yeah. Okay, so, and then the name we can call it sandbox. Cool, so that's basically it. You can see I've generated the YAML programmatically, and then I've just filled it in myself manually for now. The other thing is I wanted to point out that, yeah, the reason why I kind of made this a map of maps almost, is because you can see that even though this file, like what I was going to do before, was basically just have like this be project be sandbox, and then these things be root level. Now, the reason why I chose to go with this design instead is because you can see that everything here is actually under this kind of project map. And the reason why that's so cool is because it means that I can actually combine all of these files if I want to. So if I have like, you know, if I have like an entire game and it's got other things like various scenes or various other configuration files, you can see that if it's like this, that's might be a little bit of a problem, because start scene is not under project, so therefore it could refer to anything. I mean, obviously it's going to refer to the project in this case, but it's not really parented kind of to project. Whereas this keeps it all nicely tied here. So you could have like, you know, other configs or whatever, you know, like your render settings, and you can have them kind of all in one file. And this is the stuff that's kind of to do with project specifically. So that's why. Yeah, guys, ignore Nightbot because I'm not actually doing what it says. Nightbot's gone rogue. Okay, cool. Anyway, that's that. So let's go ahead and actually load that. So we'll go ahead and change it so that command line arguments now, instead of actually loading this scene, right, it's going to instead load a project file. So sandbox project, and then sandbox .hproj. All right. And if we go to editor layer, because this is where we actually process, I think, those command args. So yeah, so here they are. And we do open scene, right? Instead, what we want to do is come over here. We have new scene, open scene, save scene, whatever. I'm going to copy all of that, and I'm going to make... Let's make it like this. We'll have open project, new project, and save project. And you guys can guess what these are going to do. So project, save active. Now where? That's a good question. It could probably get the current project. That's a good point. We don't actually know the file path of the current project, which is a little bit annoying. Should the project know its own file path? Probably not. But the active project, that might be useful for. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I think ultimately we probably do want that to be a thing. But we'll see. So new project, we'll just do project new. And then open project can do load and then path. And what's going to happen is that once it does actually load this project, which, you know, hopefully that succeeds. So if project load, then we can do project get asset directory, project get config start scene. So we can actually combine these two guys into a start scene path. And then we can try and load or open scene start scene path. Okay, so we'll try and load whatever that is when we open the project. And then for saving the project, we won't do that for now. So then what we're going to do is if we if command line args, yeah, so this is now going to be the project file path. And we'll do open project instead. Else, we probably should make a new project. Now the thing is, like at the moment, this is a bit weird because it's not really going to work in the sense that obviously what it's going to do is going to create a project called untitled, which has no assets directory, no nothing. So you really do, like, what should happen here is prompt the user to select a directory, really. That's what really has to happen. So yeah, but for now we can just do that anyway. We'll open project file path, and then that should obviously set everything up, and it should even open our physics scene. So at the moment, that's kind of how it should work. Now, some things are not really going to work, I expect. So we had some textures there, for example. If we look at the scene serializer, I believe that's probably the thing that tries to load the texture. And in fact, texture path over here, I mean, what's going on here? So texture path, no, that's serializing it. So where do we deserialize it? Yeah, you can see it tries to do texture 2D create, and it tries to do this texture path. But this texture path is obviously relative to the assets directory. So what we need to do is we can get that path, that's fine, right? That's our kind of texture path. But then we also need to make sure that what we actually try and load is kind of like project get asset directory / this texture path. Otherwise that's not really going to load. It's not going to work. So let's go ahead and include project. And then what else was there? That's it. I think we just had textures, and yeah, that's really, we don't have any assets. So that's good to do this kind of now. And texture create, you can see actually wants a, that's really annoying. Let's go ahead and, I mean, this shouldn't be here anyway. I guess we can keep it as a string because it shouldn't be here anyway. We shouldn't be loading textures from within the texture class. That should be handled by something else. And by the way, the reason for that is because, as I mentioned, there are no file paths in the runtime, right? So then why does this constructor even exist? And also, I generally don't like to tie serialization, deserialization of assets into the actual asset class, because that's kind of the way that it works is different. For example, this texture 2D create function it's gonna load it. It's gonna load an image, right? It's gonna go into GL, open GL texture, and it's gonna load an image. How's it gonna do that? Oh, well, it's going to look at the path. It's going to open it using STB image. What is this? This is a loader that we can use to like decode JPEGs and PNGs. They don't exist in the runtime. So, well, how does that work, right? Well, you'd have an asset pack and you'd have your own texture format. So in other words, there's different, because there's different code paths really that have to run, it doesn't really make sense for this to be in here. So that's why we generally have like some other system for handling that. And so we can ask the asset manager to load a texture for us, and it will give us an OpenGL texture 2D, but the code for actually decoding the image, if it's in the editor, for example, from a PNG, is going to be in one place. And then at runtime, reading our custom format from an asset pack, that's going to be elsewhere. And so we end up having something called like an image or a texture importer class, which actually handles like the decoding and stuff. And then that might be like, they might have different code paths for runtime and for production for editing. Okay, anyway, so that's that. So that's why I'm not going to bother going to Texture 2D, changing it to use STD file system path. And instead, we can kind of do that. Cool. All right. So, yeah, I think that might work. Let's try and run this. Did I remove my creating project thing? That was in Hazelnut app. Yeah, I did. Okay, let's see what happens. Probably gonna crash, but we'll see. Okay, so there's no active project and we're trying to use it. So project load. Okay, so wait, that doesn't make sense. Oh, active project. Okay, so this should be this. There's a little bug. Okay, and this is in the same place. Ah, so project get config. No, that's because that's a static function. Okay, yeah. Okay, get config I think shouldn't be static. Let's make that not static. And then if we really do want something to be static, we can have like a static ref project get active, and then that will get us the active project. And then if that's, and then if we get that, we can obviously get that from there. So we can do project get active, get config. Like that. Alright, so the YAML file, I guess, is not loading. Oh no, okay, so assets, scenes, physics 2D is what we're trying to load. But the problem is, we're not actually relative to the project. So this is another thing that we need to do. We basically need to, and this can be done in the asset manager, but we should always also kind of be asking where we are, like where the project is, because it's all relative to the project. So we need to know where we are, basically, so that we can load, like we can have an actual absolute path to load assets from, basically. It doesn't have to be absolute, and there's a few different ways we can actually handle this, but generally, like, it's probably good to do that. So what I mean is, like, what we could do, technically speaking, if we really wanted to, was inside editor layer, when we do open project, if the project loading is successful, what we can do is we can say, okay, let's grab the parent path of this project file, and let's actually set that to be like the current path. So what this does is it actually sets the working directory to be relative to our project. Now I'm not going to do that because it's going to wreck everything else in the engine. And you generally probably don't want to do this because this obviously makes the working directory relative to the project directory. However, if you think about it, the rest of Hazelnut, the actual Hazelnut application itself, you know, has like, for example, resources it has to access that clearly are not relative to a particular project. So it doesn't really make sense for your entire editor application to all be relative to where your project lives. But you can do that. That's an option, certainly. But instead, what we probably want to do is we want to actually, like, I think I will have a project directory inside here. So we can have active project directory or something like that, right? And then what will happen is when we, so load, that will be none. So we'll just make sure that we set this kind of to null. Well, actually, it will be, we're creating a new one here, so it doesn't matter. And not null, but like a blank one. But then over here, when we actually do this, if this does is serialize successfully, we can set this to be path.parent path of the project. And I mean, save active, I guess if it's saving to a particular place, we probably also want to update this because it's changed in a way. And maybe we want to do something like if it was successful, then return true, but then also do this, right? Something like that. And so the reason for that is because now what we can do is we can get this guy. Okay, this doesn't have to be called active because it's actually relative to a project. It's not static. Yeah, and if you wanted to, you don't have to do this here, but if you wanted to, you could also do a static. Oh, we need to talk about the script as well. You could also do a static get asset path. And the idea is you specify the path of an asset. And you can call this like get absolute asset path or whatever. But this is like, you could say get asset file system path. Usually this would be in the asset manager. But you could basically just do something like return get project directory slash get asset directory slash path, because that is going to be your relative path. And then if you really want to, you can also do file system canonical, which will give you the absolute path. So if you really want the absolute path, you can just pass that into that canonical function and you'll get an absolute path. And that is also useful potentially. So now that we know that, back in scene serializer, when we try and load our texture, instead of doing this, we can do project get asset file system path. We can pass in texture path, and this is what we can basically provide. I guess I'll still do that. We can provide into here, okay? So yeah, let's, oh, and actually we have to do that for the scene as well. So where do we load the scene? So open scene, start scene path, and we try and do this. So instead of doing all of this, it's just going to be project get asset file system path, and then we do project get active start scene, and then that's the start scene path. Let's give that a go. Okay, yeah, well, it worked, I guess. We don't actually have any textures though. Play works as well. We need to, I don't think we're actually loading our C# assembly from the right path though. We just still have it hard-coded probably. I guess we can try and like apply a texture. We don't have any textures here. Content browser is still probably wrong. So content browser, what does that look at? Current directory is G asset path. which is, so once we have projects, change this. Perfect, right? So what happens is when we create a content browser panel, then instead of having G asset path, we can set the current directory to be project get asset directory. And current directory is a file system path, which is good. So project get asset directory will do nicely. And then I don't know why so if current directory doesn't equal asset path, then we go back. Oh, okay. So I guess we can, yeah, sure. Okay, we can do that. That's like that's like the base path. So I think instead of that, let's do base path in here. And let's do current directory. Let's do base path and current directory, and they'll both be the same. In fact, we can set this to be that. And then if we go here, let's call it base directory. Okay. And then what's the problem here? So we get relative begin drag drop. Item path, set drag drop payload. So we get relative to the asset path. So actually what we should do here, I think, is probably do project get asset file system path, because this is gonna have to be relative to that, I think. And that's the relative path from the working directory itself, not from the asset directory, which is different. Okay, so G asset path, where's that used? I guess we use that elsewhere. Okay, we use that here. So open scene. So okay, so that's if we drag in a scene. So why are we doing that though? Because if that's that should already be correct. But it tries to get relative. Hang on. Because this is it beginning the drag drop source. Content browser item, right? So that's it trying to happen here. So, okay, so it's actually going to get the relative path to the file system path then. Wait, no. That's already the correct path. So I don't know if we want to do it this way. We don't have to. Let's just try to get it relative to the thing. But I guess path is actually... I don't know. This is all weird. But anyway, if we do that, though, I don't think we need to do. I think we can just do that. But we'll test it out in a minute. We'll try and load another scene. So we should see that stuff disappear now. Let's try this out. We should... Actually, I don't know if that'll compile. Yeah, we're still missing... There's still another G asset path elsewhere inside scene hierarchy panel for some reason. Okay, maybe not. Maybe for no reason. No, there it is. Okay, texture path, G asset path / path. Oh, okay, so it's trying to load. Oh, okay, because this is a thing. So again, I think we can just pass in path. Because I think it's already, the way we set it up is it's already relative to the working directory, but we'll see if that's true. That's a wide string. Okay. Let's just do that. It's a bit dumb. Not sure why we're using wide strings. Whatever. Okay, so no active project when we create this. Okay, so we clearly can't create the content browser panel before we loaded a project. That doesn't make sense. So what we should do is content browser panel. We can still create it. But I would say that, like, basically this stuff should really exist within some kind of resource manager inside our editor. No, okay, so let's not actually create this yet, I think. Yeah, let's just not create it. So let's make it a scope. These panels should probably be scopes anyway, or we can make them refs. And then once we load a project, it makes sense to create it because we need to get the active project. And you could also have it take in a parameter, I guess, but being like the base path. But whatever. So when we load a project over here, let's go ahead and create scope. Change these guys to be arrows. All right. Okay, that kind of worked. Not really though. So this stuff still is wrong for some reason. Why? How is that possible? That's weird. Let's rerun this. So what's our base directory? Assets. Oh, that's wrong though. That's funny. Yeah, so it can't be the asset directory. It has to be the project directory / the asset directory, basically. Because the asset directory is always, this is relative to the project directory. I don't know if we want to, we don't have to have it be like that. Like we could say that if you ask for the asset directory, you get your working directory. You get it relative to the working directory rather than from the config. Maybe that makes more sense because you can always ask for the config if you want the actual thing. So maybe, I don't remember how it's set up inside Big Hazel, but we might want to just do it this way then. And so that way it prevents us from doing this, and it means that we can also just do that. So in other words, get asset file system path, we'll just do asset directory / path instead of project directory and asset directory, because asset directory itself will be relative to the project directory if you go through this code rather than doing get config and the raw kind of code as well, or the raw value. So let's do that. So that means that we don't have to do this. And I think everything else should probably work. Okay, maybe not. Call stack. File path is scenes. Okay, so now this is wrong because get asset file system path. That feels like it should work because this gets asset directory, which will get the project directory. So how's that possible? It's a bit weird. Let's see what's up. So project directory sandbox project. So how is this not working? Because this is clearly sandbox project / assets / scenes. And yet it's just scenes. What? Oh, this is returning a reference. Ah. Okay, so when I changed this from that to that, I should have changed it from being a const reference to being a new object. Otherwise, yeah, it will be referencing a template that's dead. And that was probably the issue. It was probably a compiler warning, to be honest. Yeah, there we go. So now it's sandbox projects / assets / scenes, which is correct. And yeah, you can see we have scenes, scripts, and textures. We still load our scene successfully. But now this stuff is obviously what we have inside our actual project, not just like fonts and whatever else. So if we go into scenes, let's try and load something else. Okay, that didn't work. Kind of expected that because I think something is weird with our drag drop. So what's the file system path? Okay, so it actually has sandbox project twice. All right. So that's going to be because of the drag drop, I think, which is okay. So let's go back to content browser, and then we just won't, I think we just won't do this. Like relative path like can just be that, I guess. I think that should be okay. Let's try that. Let's try this. The chrono. That's funny. Alright. Yeah, there you go. Whoa. Oh, because I guess this is supposed to be the checkerboard. So the checkerboard didn't work. I wonder why. Well, let's try, whoa. Let's try going back here and let's maybe try and like setting a texture. Okay, well that worked. You know what it might be? It might be like, so which one was it? Example? Yeah, example. So this is supposed to be, this gives us the errors and it's called example. Okay. So if we actually go into that file, let's just see what the texture is. So it's in, see, it has textures and all that stuff. It should just be textures. Checkerboard like that. Let's try that. Using Visual Studio 2022. All right, there you go. Textures are working. Okay, so that's it. That looks like it's pretty good. The other thing that's probably a bit weird and might not work is if you actually don't have a project file, it will crash at the moment. So if you don't have command line arguments set, it literally won't launch. And the reason for that is because the content browser panel is not going to have a, there's going to be null basically, which is not good. Because project get asset directory, like there's an active project, but the asset directory is technically empty and it's not going to be good news. So we still have to kind of probably do that. But aside from that, I think it's all done. So you can, if you have an existing project, which you will because I'll commit it, then it should work fine. So that's it. All right. Yeah, that's probably it. So, next time, well, yeah, I don't know. The new project stuff, not a big deal, but I guess probably would be good to add some UI to this stuff and flesh it out a little bit more. But aside from that, yeah, we've introduced projects and we now have this beautiful project file that we have here to actually load this kind of stuff. So that's going to be the end of this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to hit the like button if you're watching on YouTube. Patreon.com/Cherno is how you can support this series and Hazel and get access to Big Hazel. And yeah, next time I'll be away next week, as I mentioned, but the week after in 2 weeks we'll have another live stream right here on Twitch, and we will probably get started with our game. I don't know, we might do some project UI stuff. Depends how I feel, but we need a game idea as well. So I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.